56 EastEnders spoiler pictures for next week confirm tragedy as dead body unearthed. Husband Teddy, as viewers know, is in cahoots with Junior Knight, and they're working on a business opportunity in Dartford using the location of Paradise Park. Nicola remains in the dark about such a thing, but she overhears a conversation next week that leads to Teddy telling her all about the endeavour. The matriarch is left beside herself and swiftly tries to put a stop to it. Why? Because Paradise Park is the very location of Shireen's body. Shireen, as viewers will remember, was an ex-girlfriend of Harry's that vanished without a trace a number of years ago. Nicola confessed to having Shireen killed in an unexpected twist. But with the site now the subject of Teddy's new venture, will Nicola's big secret be unearthed? Elsewhere in the square, Nigel Bates is feeling suffocated by Phil Mitchell's overprotectiveness, and thus, when asked to dress up as the Easter Bunny, he accepts. But things soon take a turn, with Nigel confusing hope for Claire. Having her suspicions about Nigel after their interaction the previous week, Jean Slater questions Phil, who reveals Nigel's dementia diagnosis. Later in the week, it becomes apparent that Nigel, struggling with his diagnosis, is intending to end his own life. Kojo Asare, meanwhile, isn't thrilled at the prospect of moving back to the Vic, as building work starts on the ruins of the pub, and he expresses his desire to live alone to George Knight. Determined to prove himself, Kojo sets out to land himself a job, and he successfully secures a trial shift with Harry at the Archers. He proves so good that by week's end, he has landed a full-time job. It's going to be a big week in Walford. EastEnders legend fried after dramatic return storyline. He's never just sat in the laundrette. The star is best known for his role as Grant Mitchell on the BBC soap, which he played between 1990 to 1999. Since leaving EastEnders, Kemp has occasionally returned to Walford for key storylines, including Peggy Mitchell's death in 2016. Grant's most recent appearance on the show saw him checking in on his brother amid Phil's ongoing mental health issues. The tragic storyline developed across multiple weeks before the 40th anniversary episode saw Phil attempting to take his own life. Meanwhile, Grant found himself romantically entangled with former flame Sharon Watts, despite her relationship with his newly discovered cousin Teddy. He was also faced with the shocking news of his friend Nigel Bates's dementia diagnosis. Speaking to Radio Times, Kemp discussed the various emotional scenes during his return, sharing that they had ultimately taken a toll on him. "It was wonderful, but you come away from it slightly fried," he explained. Grant comes back and within a minute he's fighting, he's crying, he's making love, then he's crying about it, then he's fighting again. He's never just sat in the laundrette. The first scene in the anniversary was me breaking into the Archers and wrestling a Beretta 9mm off my brother, so it wasn't like going to the cafe and saying, "Can I have a bacon roll, please?" Despite the intense storylines, the actor shared his delight at reprising the fan-favourite role for another short stint. "I think a part of me is Grant, and part of Grant is me. It was great to put the leather jacket on again, and also a relief that I could still get in it," he joked. EastEnders fans delighted by the very unexpected return of 90s legend. I am, of course, talking about Sonia Fowler's trumpet. The brass instrument is woven into the fabric of the character, who departed after 32 years yesterday. Sonia, alongside sister Bianca Jackson and daughters Bex and Julia, drove off into the sunset for a new life in Bali. Like most soap exits, it didn't come without a hitch. Son's abusive, estranged father Terry Cant arrived in Walford to make amends with her, but his true colours soon shone through. After an altercation, the women locked him in their garage before jumping in his hire car and darting off. Towed along in his speedboat, Bianca and Sonia waved on to their adoring neighbours, but they weren't alone in the vehicle. Bianca whipped out the trumpet, asking her sister to give it one last blast before throwing it away when they got to Stansted Airport. The familiar bars of Julia's theme then kicked in, and it was clear that this was the end of an era. Farewell to the Jacksons. EastEnders viewers were obsessed with Sonia's trumpet fans, immediately flocked to social media to describe the emotional and iconic moment. On X, 01 Delbird said, "Sonia should have played the Enders theme on her trumpet. Oh, I'm going to miss Sonia and Bianca. and that trumpet added, "What needs to said?" Absolute Gazelle wrote, "There's honestly nothing more iconic than Sonia picking up her trumpet one final time while she and Bianca go off in a speedboat for their big exit on EastEnders. Come on, Sonia and the trumpet in a speedboat? Camp perfection. Love that Natalie Cassidy is booked and busy, but I hope Albert Square has Sonia back where she belongs in a few years," added Ryan JL. ALGBT Crowley made a very good point. British culture is mad because how do I explain Sonia and Bianca going off in a speedboat while Sonia plays the trumpet? The instrument was introduced shortly after the Jackson clan's arrival in Albert Square and was purchased by Sonia's stepfather, Alan. In 1997, she was escorted to Mum Carroll after being found by a police officer illegally busking outside of the tube station. Natalie Cassidy speaks about Sonia's trumpet. Natalie addressed the importance of the object in her exit interview, telling us that her favourite memory has to be the trumpet. "That's something that stays with me and that I use throughout my daily life," she said. "It doesn't matter what show I do. They want to mention Sonia's trumpet or have me play a trumpet. It's become an iconic 90s pop culture thing, and I'm very proud of it." During an episode of Secrets from the Square in 2020, she told host Stacey Dooley that the idea was brilliant and that she has white van drivers shouting, "Where's your trumpet?" to this very day. Devastation for Phil in EastEnders as he finds heartbreaking goodbye letter. Nigel is now settled back into Albert Square, but he remains incredibly impacted by the problems he faces with his deteriorating health. Despite being supported by good friend Phil Mitchell, upcoming episodes will see Nigel reach a devastating conclusion about his future. As Easter begins in the square, Nigel remains bothered by Phil's overprotectiveness. Wanting to prove himself, Nigel decides to dress up as the Easter Bunny for the egg hunt. Things start off well, but Nigel sadly confuses Hope for his daughter Claire, prompting Harvey, who doesn't know about the diagnosis, to argue with Nigel. After the altercation, Jean, Harvey and Ian question Phil on Nigel's well-being, and he finally reveals all about his diagnosis. Phil makes a discovery about his friend. That evening, though, Phil accidentally makes a worrying discovery and realizes Nigel intends to end his own life if his memory continues to get worse. Phil confronts Nigel, who attempts to explaining his reasoning. As Jean chats with Nigel, Phil flees and finds solace with Linda. She encourages him to support Nigel, and buoyed by the chat, Phil heads home to make amends with his mate. Just as he gets there, Phil finds a goodbye letter from Nigel, unaware he's on his way to the tube stop. It seems Nigel's departure comes to a halt, as he's later seen talking to Phil about his mental health. Phil attempts to dissuade Nigel from the idea to end his life before the dementia takes hold, but he doesn't have any luck. Fortunately, though, Yolande is able to help Phil and Nigel when she comes up with an idea. EastEnders fans call for a brilliant returning character to be back permanently. Bex, as fans know, was brought back for the funeral of Dad Martin Fowler, who tragically died during the BBC One soap's 40th anniversary week in February. From reconnecting with Mum Sonia to providing Lily Slater with support in the wake of their dad's passing, plus getting to know baby sister Julia, Bex has had no shortage of scenes in the weeks since her return. Following Martin's funeral, the character remained in Walford for a week before departing with Sonia and Auntie Bianca Jackson in emotional scenes as they set off for new adventures. Bex's brief comeback went down a treat with fans, with a number taking to social media to call for the character to be brought back on a more permanent basis. Writing on X, formerly known as Twitter, Josh said, "I was never her biggest fan during her original stint, but I very much enjoyed Bex this time around. Lovely to see how she's matured in the last 5 years, and I really hope they don't recast the role in the future." The sentiment was echoed by fan account or EastEnders, who wrote, "Samey such a welcome return this time around." EastEnders fans, Ryan added, "A brilliant mini stint for Bex. I hope this isn't the last we'll see of her. With Lily still on the square, hopefully she'll come back one day. So glad that Jasmine Armfield returned for the role." Bex was previously in the show as a regular, with Jasmine in the role between 2014 and 2020. The character's exit storyline saw her decide to go travelling, and thus she left the square in emotional scenes. Tragedy in Walford as EastEnders legend decides to take their own life. Shortly after Nigel's surprise return to Walford over Christmas after 26 years away, it was revealed he had been diagnosed with young-onset dementia. Over the last few months, fans of the BBC soap have seen him finally open up to those closest to him about his condition, while his symptoms have also increased. Earlier this week, he mistook the chemist for his old video shop and had to be brought home by Jean Slater. Forthcoming scenes will see Nigel begin to feel suffocated by Phil's overprotectiveness, and as Easter arrives in Walford next week, he takes up a request from Yolande Truman to appear as an Easter bunny, believing it will prove himself to Phil. All is going well until he confuses a young Hope Fowler with his stepdaughter Claire Bates, sparking an argument with Harvey Manor. After the altercation, Harvey, Jean and Ian Beale question Phil on Nigel's well-being, and he finally reveals all about his dementia diagnosis. As Phil returns home, he then accidentally makes the worrying discovery that Nigel intends to end his own life if his memory continues to deteriorate. Actor Paul Bradley explains, "At Christmas, Nigel devised a test for himself so he could find out what condition he was in. He's composed a list of questions that he should know the answer to without any problems. When he does the test, it persuades him that he's further down the road than he hoped. Phil finds out that Nigel's plan is that rather than seek protective care, if he fails the test, he will take drastic action and end his own life." Paul continues, "Nigel wants to face the whole thing without burdening anyone, as he sees it. That was his whole approach from the start, and the reason he left his wife. He wants to keep his independence and be himself as far as he can be, because he knows the condition is going to make him lose parts of himself. So Nigel makes this difficult decision because he believes wrongly that this will be better for his loved ones." Upon realizing what Nigel plans to do, Phil refuses to listen to his friend's explanation and leaves, triggered by his own recent suicide attempt earlier this year. "I think Phil feels betrayed," says Paul, "because in The Archers, when he considered taking his own life, Nigel told him not to do it because he was ill and needed Phil. Nigel's plea was part of the reason that Phil decided to go and get help, so he feels betrayed and hurt." Phil then seeks advice from Linda Carter, and their conversation forces him to think about things differently. But when Phil returns home, he's horrified to find a goodbye letter from Nigel. Fortunately, Nigel is found after a desperate search, and he agrees to head back to number 55, where he breaks down explaining how he wants to end his life before the dementia takes hold. After Phil's attempts to dissuade him fail, Yolande gives him some food for thought, and Phil comes up with a plan to become Nigel's full-time carer. At first, Nigel doesn't want Phil to become his carer, but he's persuaded eventually, Paul reveals. "I think it's incredibly moving that Phil offers to do this, and Nigel is overwhelmed by it. Phil and Nigel are like the odd couple, but deep down they love each other and want to take care of each other."
Các bạn vừa theo dõi một sản phẩm của EastEnders April TV. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn